All right, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of A Sip of Knowledge with Lou Bryson and Liz Rhoades. Plus, this week, special guest Kevin Smith from Company Distilling. I'm going to let your hosts give a more formal, extended introduction to Kevin in just a moment. Real quick, before I turn things over, I'm Will Hookinga from Zavvy.co, and as always, just want to point out a few ways you can interact with your hosts and their guests throughout the show today. So on your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello, let us know where you're joining us from around the world. So we already have a lively group here today, which is always good to see. If you have a question at any point for either Liz, Lou, or Kevin, there's a little button at the bottom of the screen that says ask a question. So just click that button, type your question in. I'll be keeping an eye out for those throughout the show today. And last but not least, there's a share button at the top that allows you to invite your friends to join us. So feel free to do that as well. But Liz, Lou, with all that said, I'll turn things over to you.
Super. Thanks, Will, as usual. Hello, everyone. As Will mentioned, we have quite a chatter happening in the chat. So really excited to see everyone on. And we'll, of course, be checking in with the chat box and the question box as we go along with the show. It's okay. Will's posting some stuff for us, and we'll get to that in a second. It's been actually quite a few weeks since we had a show.
We meant well.
Yeah. So really appreciate everyone joining on today. And of course, our special guest today was Kevin Smith, which we'll get into in a second. But quickly, hey everyone, I'm Liz Rhoades, a technical distiller and spirit consultant. I have over a decade experience in alcoholic beverage. In about a month, actually, I'll be celebrating my 15th year in alcoholic beverage. So excited about that. I spent most of my career at a little tiny mom and pop shop known as Diageo, but now currently Director of Whiskey Ops, Head of Whiskey Development at Whistle Pig Whiskey, and also on the side, run my own consulting company called Spirit Safe Consulting. However, I'm really excited to be here back in the saddle with our friend Kevin. And before we dig into all that, I'm going to just pop it over to Lou.
Thanks, Liz. I am Lou Bryson. I am a whiskey writer. I was the managing editor of Whiskey Advocate magazine for 20 years, which gave me an amazing kind of catbird seat to observe and mold the voice of whiskey, as it was. I do have these two books of my own, Whiskey Masterclass, a deep dive into, thank you, whiskey flavor and aroma creation, and Tasting Whiskey, a much broader view of the entire whiskey culture, review, everything. I am currently freelancing, writing. I'm actually just started doing some writing for Flaviar, the whiskey sample company, or I guess booze sample company. They are completely revamping their newsletter and have asked me to do some writing for them. So I'm actually working on finishing up a piece on Pennsylvania rye whiskey right now, as it would have it. And that brings me to what I'm drinking today. I'm taking the opportunity to have a sip in the middle of the day. And today I have Old Elk straight rye, not Pennsylvania rye, but rye nonetheless. What is it? Wyoming, Colorado rye, made by Greg Metz from MGP. So that's what I have today. There it is in the glass. That'll work. Thank you. Glad you're all here. Good to see everybody again. It's good to be back in the saddle, as Liz put it. And I'll bounce it back to you.
Cool. Awesome. So I've got a lovely sparkling water, but also because I adore my writer friends, although this is not a friend. I recently am also reading about mezcal from Emma Jansen. I picked this up at Tales of the Cocktail, and it's been a really super interesting read.
Very nice.
So yeah, just a shout out for that tome as well. We seem to have lost Kevin.
Yeah, so how about that mezcal?
All right, so while Kevin is coming back online, I just wanted to recognize everyone who's done a shout out. So hello, Grant, out in Charlotte. So thanks for joining. Lisa, hey, from Interstave, thanks for joining. We've got some Tennessee folks. So James from Nolensville, Tennessee. So thanks for joining us. And then we've got Ashley from IJW Whiskey Co. Thanks for joining. And then Grant replied, tell Keith and Kevin says hello. So it seems like there's quite a lively bunch tuning in with us today. And I think that's awesome. So Kevin is back. So quick intro. Again, so Kevin and I have been corresponding, trying to get him on the show because I thought he would be an excellent guest. And he's prepared actually some slideshow material, which is awesome. We were reviewing it in the green room, and I think it's going to be excellent. Kevin, for those of you who don't know, Kevin Smith, he is currently Director of Operations at Company Distillery. However, he's had quite a tenure in the industry, over 2 decades worth. I've known Kevin for about 5. I think we established. We met actually at the American Malting Barley Association board meeting, which we were both a part of the board back when we were in our respective former employers. But however, Company Distillery, they just had their grand opening about a month ago. It's located in Townsend, Tennessee, which I'm hearing and seeing also from Kevin's window is quite a beautiful place. But yeah,
and also experiencing by the poor internet connection too. So it's out in the rural areas.
Pros and cons.
Feel your pain,
Right.
buddy. Feel your pain.
I've got great.
By the way, we're expecting thunderstorms, so anything might happen. Just warning you.
I think this will be an interesting talk, and Kevin, his career itself has been interesting because he's had experience not only in beverage alcohol. He spent quite a number of years at Jack Daniel's, so Brown-Forman, but also he spent some time in fuel ethanol production as well. So I think we're going to dig into a little bit of that as we have a discussion. But without further ado, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation. And I'll set my humility aside and say that Liz and I actually met because we're mutually outstanding in a field of barley. That seems to be the joke.
Is that one word, outstanding, or you were outstanding in the?
Outstanding.
Sorry.
You get close to agriculture when you're in this industry, but it's the maltsters in particular that like that dad joke about being outstanding in the fields when you're inspecting barley crops. So that was quite an experience.
Yeah, that's like. I mean, I feel like I wish we had a picture of that.
Probably do somewhere, right?
Someone has a picture of it, I'm sure. But anyway, Kevin, thanks for joining, and we're really excited to have you. So, how we start normally, most of our shows, we just kind of ask our guest to walk us through, like, how did you get here? What's your story?
Yeah, it's been quite a ride, I have to say. It's been a great career so far. I really got started in Louisville. I was a student at University of Louisville, studying for my master's in microbiology, environmental microbiology. And the renowned microbiologist, Dr. Ronald Atlas, was into all sorts of things, I was studying biofilms and Legionella pneumophila and interactions in dental unit water lines, contamination events in dental unit water lines. So got deep into the microbiology, and one thing that Dr. Atlas didn't like was that Brown Forman would steal all his students to work and attract them into the industry and get drawn in there and never finish their degrees. But fortunately, I did actually leave Brown Forman my first stint with Brown Forman. I've been with them 3 times to go and actually focus and finish my master's at University of Louisville. And about the time I was finishing up, then Jack Daniels was looking for a microbiologist. And given my experience in the R&D lab, then they invited me down to Lynchburg. I came down and spent 5 years there, and as a quality specialist and microbiologist, and then went out into the fuel ethanol industry. So I helped start up a 30 million absolute gallon fuel ethanol plant in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Spent a couple years there, and then I transitioned to work with Lallemand Biofuels at the time, and a group that came out of the Alltech Ethanol Technology Group, and worked in central Iowa for several years, but actually across the broader industry, doing kind of consultative sort of sales, base sales to the larger fuel ethanol industry. I got pretty heavily involved with the annual Lallemand Alcohol School, which is, to me is a great experience. And I would encourage anybody to go and spend that week at Alcohol School. They have one coming up September 11th. I'll be there. I think I've participated in about, pardon me?
Are you teaching this year?
Yeah, I give 2 lectures. One of it is part of this presentation that I might show some of the traditional aspects of whiskey making. And then I also give a presentation on the use of pilot fermentation techniques to optimize fermentation and conversion processes as well. So I think I've been to about half of the roughly 40 alcohol schools that they've put on, at least the main one. And they also Lallemand also publishes the alcohol textbook, which I've written a chapter on yeasting practices in the American whiskey industry as well. So
I always recommend that book as a reference to people who ask.
It's a great book. It's interesting because that even that course is it's kind of moved. It was originally located in Lexington, Kentucky, very much focused on the beverage side, and then as the fuel ethanol industry really came on strong, they moved more towards the fuel ethanol side, but now it's come back into be a balance between the two. Yeah. In fact, they run a concurrent craft short course with the alcohol school. That's just a 2-day event too. That's worth visiting. Unfortunately, this year it's at the same time as the ADI conference in St. Louis, which is a bit of a drag, but it's the way things work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's no shortage of conferences and educational references, which I think is great, because I don't think that's necessarily been the case in beverage. True.
Yeah, I was always amazed in the fuel ethanol side how open and willing to work together these plants were. But you can imagine so many were starting off greenfield with very little experience and were just thirsting for information. Whereas a lot of the established, when there are much fewer, many fewer distilleries, beverage distilleries, were a little bit more closed off and almost secretive. It's nice to see how the craft side of the industry has really kind of become that same collaborative animal now that I saw in the fuel ethanol industry, while the larger companies still seem to want to stay on the outside of that, which is unfortunate. So obviously about a year ago, I transitioned to Company Distilling. I kind of had a choice. Jeff Arnett, who was the master distiller at Jack Daniels for 12 years, and I worked with him there for 20 years, left, the first master distiller to leave Jack Daniels willingly. So he decided to bring me with him here, and which was great because, I was the only one that he invited along. So I feel honored to be part of the group that helped start Company Distilling. So I kind of had a choice. I could have gotten comfortable and ridden out the last 10 years of my career at Jack Daniels, but instead I decided to come here and work my butt off for the next 10 years and see how this plays out.
And you've been, so you said it's been about a year, right? Like, but the
Right.
plans have been, because you just had your grand opening, which is amazing.
Right.
And congratulations again about that.
Thank you
But
so much.
it's only been a year in planning, because that seems like a pretty aggressive
It's
timeline.
there's some story behind that. I mean, I think that the group has been. In fact, I've known about it for probably a year before I left Jack Daniel's. There was discussions about this, so this is really kind of a 2-year effort. But it even goes back. The local Blount County partnership is one of the most incredible economic development engines machines that I've seen. They're really doing a great job of helping bring industry to the local area. Townsend, if you've not been here, is what we call the peaceful side of the Smokies. So the north side of the Smokies it has the Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg entrance, which is very busy, very touristic. And then the Townsend side is kind of been the Sleepy Hollow where Cades Cove is. It's just absolutely beautiful. And so, we hope to do kind of a upscale sustainable development, not to bring industry just for the sake of industry, but to do it in a sustainable manner. So we're trying to be part of it. We actually bought the property, and there was a building on site here that we thought we were going to utilize, but the foundation wouldn't support the equipment and the activities, and so we ended up razing that, and then building. We actually officially opened for business on Memorial Day weekend, probably 8 months later than we expected to open, and had a soft opening then, and then our grand opening was July 8th. So been very busy.
Just an odd detail question. Do you know what the elevation is there?
I don't. Yeah, I should know that, but I don't. But I know we're kind of in a bowl, and it goes up all around us. So it's,
okay.
It's great for bike riding. I've enjoyed the cycling around here as well. It's helping me get fit again. So.
I also just wanted to point out, it's been a while since I've seen you, but your beard is quite magnificent.
Yeah, it's growing.
Townsend,
nice.
Going out to the mountains and.
I thought we could do a session of sip and knowledge of beer grooming tips with Lou Bryson and Kevin Smith, right? So,
I mean, I don't have anything to comment about, but I will listen.
We're at this facility. We're going to be brewing. We have, Grant said hello from Deutsche Beverage, and Deutsche Beverage out of Charlotte has provided a 3.5 barrel brew system for us here.
Nice.
So we're going to be probably in the next 3-4 weeks. We'll get that thing fired up, and so we'll actually be producing and serving beer on site. We're going to go for kind of the traditional German style cold fermentation side products to complement the lower alcohol, to complement the higher proof spirits sold on site. So since this was my first endeavor into brewing, I thought I'd had to grow the beard to look more like a brewer. That's obligatory beard.
Hey, I mean, come on now.
Right. That's.
We'll do this.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, that's so super exciting stuff happening. We want to dig into a couple of things. Do we want to bring up, do we want to dig into Sour Mash and learn a little bit more about Company Distilling?
That's what I'm here for. Let's do that.
All right. Yeah.
We should do it now before we get into.
Yeah, let's not screw around here.
Yeah, sounds good. Do you want to call up the slides? You want me to?
Yeah, just reshare your screen.
Oh, you have to reshare the screen, because I got kicked off. That's right. So, or I dropped off, I should say.
Yeah, I didn't kick anybody off. This is
I know.
Spurious.
All right, there was that rural problem again. Okay, so there we go. So this is the presentation that I've given to several venues, including the Worldwide Distilled Spirits Conference and the Beam Institute, kind of defining
nice bottle design, by the way.
Yes, it's beautiful. Thank you. It's well received, and we spent a lot of time focusing on packaging with all of our products. There's many operating definitions of craft, and I in this presentation I actually kind of include the book Craft and Argument by Pete Brown. If you're familiar, it's a very interesting book that discusses the operating definitions of the term craft. and really breaks those down. Things like the size of the distillery and the intent of the producer, what's in the distiller's heart, for example, the terms handcrafted, and ultimately he breaks those down and argues that those really don't mean anything, which sort of supports what I've done here, which is try to define those terms in the context of process. Because as I've always said, how else would you do it? So in that presentation, I kind of discover the aspects of process. I'll pause for a second.
Ooh, he really did.
He certainly did. So I think this is a picture of their grand opening.
Is that the grand opening? Yeah. I mean, there's somebody behind the lectern. That's usually. But that's not where he is right now. Is that where he is? Is that the company house that he was talking about?
So can you hear me, Liz? I cut the share because the share might be causing the problem with the bandwidth. But I will, we can pop on and off as need be.
Okay.
And
that's really interesting things, but maybe let's just start off, I think, digging more into your new venture in Company Distilling, and we could start there, and then I would love to circle back on sour mash.
Or maybe not.
Which 100% I totally get this, because this is like when I'm in Vermont.
I lost you for the last 30 seconds. So
you're moving now. That's good. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. You can hear me. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I lost you for the last 30 seconds. Sorry.
No worries. We totally get it. I was just explaining that this is like when I'm in Vermont. Wi-Fi's not great. So
yeah, we got fiber in February, and it's been a life changer.
Yeah.
But I just thought, so we can not maybe do the screen for the moment. We would love to circle back though on sour mash, because I think you certainly have a lot of great stuff on that, and we'll talk about beverage versus fuel. But if you want to just walk us through more about the distillery and capacity.
What's the plan? What's it doing?
Right. So we have you saw the picture of the bourbon that is a maple finished wheated bourbon. Of course, that liquid is sourced. We don't have a facility where we're distilling yet, but we took a different strategy from many of the other distilleries, the startup distilleries. A lot of startup distilleries will go out and chase older whiskey, trying to make an impact and an impression with obviously older whiskey is considered to be somewhat better. It's not always true. We chose to go for the 4-year-old whiskey, and actually one of our components is just under 4 years when we acquired it. So we actually have a age statement on ours, the 3-year age statement. But then we took what we determined to be good quality whiskeys, mature whiskeys, and blended those together. You have some synergies in blending. And then we took that product and aged it in Maplewood. And so we did put our own production spin on that. And it has a very pronounced and dominant maple nose and sweetness.
How did you get the maple in? Was it staves or chunks or spirals or?
Right. So, Jack Daniel's, of course, and one of Jeff Arnett's signature innovations was the development of the Jack Daniel's Gold, which was finished in maple barrels. And what you discover is that barrels leak like sieves, right? Those maple wood barrels. And so it's a much more sustainable approach to actually insert the toasted wood into the barrel. So we chose to use a kind of proprietary process in which we did bring the maple wood into the barrels, and I guess we're kind of reserving the discussion of the process. But yes, it was inserted into the existing barrels, and it really doesn't take very long in that finish aging to do that. So, and that's really going to become a theme for our distillery, for our company, to utilize the up to 150 hardwood species in the native forests here in eastern Tennessee to do finish aging on many of our products as they come out. So
I mean, I feel like finishing definitely has become a thing. I mean, certainly we do a lot of finishing. That's part of our innovation strategy. And I think
I actually just got samples on the latest little book, and there's 4 different wood finishes that went into it. 4 different wood finished malt whiskeys, which kind of surprised me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I feel like, however, this has become a really great innovation lever or strategy. The regs don't always help us.
That's what I wanted to ask. How do we do that labeling? What do we call it? I mean, you just have to say it's aged with, finished with, or...
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's lots of questions. I mean, if we even go over to the malt whiskey side, that current discussion on the definition of malt whiskeys, and I was actually on a podcast 2 weeks ago with Toby Tucker of the Country Malt Group, and we discussed the the American malt whiskey definitions. And I think one of the points that came out of that, there was just a proposal issued by the TTB on single malt definition. And the Scotch Whiskey Commission, or Single Malt Whiskey Commission, actually proposed some definitions. And in the TTB proposal, then it was added that colors and flavors and additives would be allowable.
Which is...
No, not now. Not now.
We're leaning in.
I know. I really wanted to hear that.
Which I think is probably what he was saying could be more analogous to Scotch, which I think a lot of the world looks to the Scotch whiskey industry in the malt space.
Sure.
Just as we expand and as it becomes a more global category.
Oh, trees moving. Trees moving.
Oh, there he goes.
I lost you again for the last 30 seconds if you weren't aware, so sorry.
You were talking, you had just said something about flavor and color additions?
Yeah, that flavor and color additions were allowed. And like I said, I think that completely blows wide open the definition and makes it unpredictable. And you can fabricate anything you want, which I think kind of goes against the intent of defining a category. And
you say that was the TTB's suggestion?
The TTB proposal that was issued for public comment on July 29th. And so we all need to make public comment if we don't want that to be part of the definition.
And I guess, and maybe Lou probably has the same question, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but since you were in the hot seat and we're going to do it anyway. What's your opinion?
Right.
And if you don't want to comment, that's fine too.
You mean my opinion on whether that should include that? Oh, I absolutely think it shouldn't include that aspect of the definition. Because like I said, I mean, I don't mind saying what needs to be said, right? I'm not going to shy away from that. But you have to kind of imagine if the single malt American Single Malt Commission didn't have that in there, why did it end up in the TTB? Maybe they were just sort of fishing for because they know it's in other categories, and so they're just looking for the comment. And it's not necessarily a given thing that'll end up there. They just need the comments. There may be somebody out there that's driving that issue. I don't know, who or why, but there could have been a voice out there that was arguing for that. So,
sure. I mean, I would just. This is just me thinking about this, totally unbiased, but a lot of new entrants, right, into the category with younger whiskeys, maybe that could be advantageous.
Right.
Got to take a longer view. Just saying.
Yeah. I think the next thing that we'll be adding is allowing rapid maturation processes, right? I mean, that's a whole other can of worms. Sorry.
And I don't know if we only have 30 minutes left. Like, wow, we've already blown through half the show. So that's probably will be a longer discussion than 30 minutes. So Would love to maybe circle back to talk about sour mash, and also to talk about fuel versus beverage, and kind of the things you've learned throughout that. I don't know. There was someone who suggested that you turn off your video.
Turn off
Not
my
because they
video.
did, just to save bandwidth. And when it's not
I
the beard.
see.
It's all lies.
Yeah.
It's not the
But
beard.
but maybe if you, in just interest of bandwidth, if
Just
you
cut
want
the
to email,
camera.
No. If you
Yeah.
want to email the presentation to one of us,
Okay.
and then we can kind of pull that up for you. So let's try that.
Okay.
So
All right. So my camera's off. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
So I can definitely do that. I thought that the camera would help.
Well, I mean, we could try it both ways. So maybe just we'll parallel path.
What a beautiful tone.
I can't hear. I mean, if you can see me or hear me, I can't hear anything right now.
Okay.
Oh wait,
See
now
ya.
you're back.
We hear
Now
you.
you're back.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can hear you.
I love that I can tell when you're on because the leaves are moving. That's such a
Yeah,
such a
that's nice.
pleasant indicator.
Will's beard kind of moves too. So.
Yeah, that's right. It's a bouncing beard. So while I try to email this to you,
Let's try that. We don't have any questions in the chat, but certainly there were more comments out from the audience. I see Kathleen, hello from SoCal. Of course, our boy Brad. Hey, Brad. Greetings from Panama. Good to see you on here. And then a lot of people saying they love Townsend. And
Yeah.
it's a beautiful place for sure.
who haven't been to Townsend are saying that they want to come visit. So 100% you should. And actually the green little rectangle at the bottom of the screen is a link to Company Distilling website. So you can check that out for sure and go visit.
If you want to kind of switch over and talk about the sour mashing process and kind of get into that before we see the slides. I think, obviously there is a rich tradition and history to the sour mash process. And in the slide, if we ever see it, I have a graph that kind of looks at pH and temperature throughout the mashing and fermentation cycles. That is, I think, I call it the key to process optimization at a distillery. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about that. But let's, first talk about the term souring. Souring just refers to the lowering of the pH of an environment. And so what we're really speaking about is pH balance throughout the process to help the enzymes that convert the starches in the mash down to simple sugars for the yeast to consume. And then pH is critical for allowing those enzymes to continue working throughout fermentation so that we get full and complete conversion throughout secondary conversion. That's what happens after the mash cooker and then throughout the life of fermentation. So
and that's a really good point, Kevin, because, and oftentimes I'm sure you've done protocols in this way too, but depending on what enzymes, what your growth spell is, and then also your fermentation protocol. But you hit it on the head when you said, souring and mashing versus fermentation, and those could be two different, right? Oftentimes are two different pHs, depending on the environment, and again, all of those considerations.
So sour mash has an effect on mashing as well as fermentation. Ah,
It does, right? Yeah. So I mean,
okay.
if you look, if you basically you take grain and you put it into water, and you're going to get this, depending on the grain bill, a natural pH point of about 5.6, and that is a little bit high for these enzymes to work as you want them to work. And so by adding backset to that mash, it brings that pH of the mash in the cooker down a little bit lower, and then those enzymes work faster
Huh.
and better. And so you have a lower starting point, and then that mash is, when it's finished in the mash cooker and you're flowing it to the fermenter, if you utilize the second aspect of the sour mashing process, which is using a lactic bacterial soured yeast mash, that further brings the pH down in the fermenter to you get this perfect pH starting point of 4.8 to 5.0, which is where the yeast are most active. You get the fastest initial fermentation kinetics, and that's the yeast is off to the races. So the other thing about having a very fast initial fermentation is that it gives that yeast the competitive advantage. It's not a sterile environment. The bacteria want to thrive and grow as well. And so there's nothing that shuts down bacteria better than an active, healthy yeast. So by outcompeting the bacteria, you don't get the souring, the deeper souring effect from the bacteria, and then the pH in the fermenter stays higher throughout fermentation, allowing the malt enzymes to continue throughout a 4, 5, 6 day fermentation to get that secondary conversion and fermentation. I know it is a little bit wonky, but and the technical details, but it really is about pH balance and control.
When you said, sorry, I need to have clarification here. You said secondary conversion during fermentation.
Yeah, so primary conversion is basically what happens in the mash cooker as you add all that malt in there, and it really happens very quickly. But there still are some starches, carbohydrates that are either they could be just in larger grain particles. They could be bound in lipid or protein carbohydrate complexes or fiber complexes. And it's going to take a while for those to solubilize throughout the fermentation period. So more of this starch is solubilizing into the fermenting mash. And then those enzymes, if you take care of them, can access those.
Huh.
Liz, I've sent that presentation in a PDF
perfect.
form to you, so and hopefully you can kind of see that.
Yeah, and just on that note, so yeah, I would normally call that SSF, or simultaneous saccharification and fermentation, but yeah, a lot of people aren't aware of that. So that's something.
Exactly, yeah, SSF, and that was a term that was broadly used in the fuel ethanol side, but wasn't necessarily common lingo in the beverage side up until recent years. But that's exactly. I think you have these terms secondary fermentation and secondary conversion versus primary, and people are a little bit vague about those terms. And one of the things that I kind of have proven to myself over the time is that primary conversion that you get will lead to roughly about a 4.8 proof gallons per bushel yield in a standard fermentation mash, whereas it's that secondary conversion that then really drives to the highest level yield of which is about 5.5 pH.
Oh wow!
There's lots of interesting. So actually, if you kind of scroll way down to that chart, you can sort of see
I am. Oh, you have it. Oh, you have it up. Oh.
Yeah, and you have to go way down, probably to like slide 20 or so. Right there, back up. Yeah, that one. No, one below that.
Wait, and
one more down.
Oh,
that one. Yep.
There it is.
Yes. So that one sort of shows that pH effect. The pH, the blue line is pH. The left side of the chart is mashing. The right side of the chart is fermentation. The left side is only 2 hours, and the right side is 150 hours. So the scales are very different, but it has to be to show what's going on there. So you can see in the blue line that it starts at about a 5.6 pH, and then with the addition of the sour mash, it drops to 5.4-ish. And then as you cook, you get some like protein solubilized, that pH will drop a little bit. Then when you flow to the fermenter and add the lactic sour yeast mash, it'll drop to about 4.8 to 5.0. Then fermentation activity ensues. You get a lot of CO2, which suppresses the pH point in the fermenter, and then over time that pH will actually gradually come up. That's if you have a good sanitary situation in the fermenters. Most distilleries, that pH will continue to go down due to contamination and lack of control of contamination, and therefore they're basically shooting themselves in the foot and not getting secondary conversion throughout. And that's the difference between most plants, which yield somewhere around 4.8 proof gallons per bushel, versus the highly optimized fermenter plants that are about 5.4, 5.5. So, I do hold up Jack Daniel's as one of an example of one of the best optimized distilleries in the world. In that regard, sanitary control.
I mean, because you work there, right? So,
well, I take a little bit of credit for it, but not all of it, obviously. There was the old guy that hired me, a guy named Jerry Hamilton, who was quite an SOB in his own right, but he was just one of these hard guys that he did everything to improve and optimize the process over years, and doesn't really get enough credit for all the good work that he did. But he really is responsible for the current state of Jack Daniel's and the high level of optimization that goes on there. And I learned a lot from him in the process, so I benefited from that as well.
And you're saying that the sanitation is a large part of that.
Sanitation is a huge part of that.
Okay.
There's one of the reasons that if you look at my current facility, and one of the reasons we have a brew system, which is going to be our mash system, is because the fabrication and design is much better than most distillers put into their distilleries. I think that we're going to be able to keep a very sanitary operation here because of that. And at our larger facility that we plan to build within a couple of years, it'll be the same thing. I often say that distillers design with an equipment focus in mind. You say, we're going to be a distillery, let's go buy a still, and then you fill in back. Whereas brewers do a more process-centric design approach, where everything is integrated together, and the sanitary fabrication is far better than what you see in any distillery. And that is because out of necessity, that beer is going to go directly into a consumer's mouth, whereas you get the benefit of distillation as a kill step for any hazards and contamination that might exist in the distillery.
So there's a term I'm going to be saving and using. Kill step. I like that.
Kill step, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm keeping that one.
Always keep one in your pocket. A kill step.
So a good follow-up question, and I agree with a lot of what you said in terms of method, right? Between brewers and distillers. I guess, so first of all, I want to know a little bit more about your setup at Company and your thought process with that, especially it being mindful of contamination. Obviously, there's a lot of process pieces outside of equipment. However, I guess my real question, and this kind of dovetails into fuel versus beverage. I always like to talk about, I've mentioned many times on the show, micro terroir, right? And I think there's a huge piece in there that's, flavor deprivation, right? But so flavor versus yield, that's I feel like a huge debate. And I just wanted to kind of pick your brain quickly on that.
Okay, so I'll kind of back up and put it in the context of discussions I've had with some of my good friends in the Scotch whiskey industry, right? And so there's this long-standing argument of, can you run too clean a fermentation, right? And it's an interesting discussion. So what a lot of my Scotch friends or Scottish friends like is to have, as the yeast settles down in a fermenter, you're going to get a rise of some bacterial activity. Yeah. And the thing is that will sour the fermenter deeply. And what I would argue is that it is very difficult to control and be consistent about the wild end of fermentation that results in that scenario. Contrast that with what's utilized in a proper lactic sour mash process, where you're actually taking a controlled lactic bacteria and infusing it into a yeast mash and growing it up very rapidly, but then pasteurizing. So you get all that effect and the flavor influences of that in a controlled way versus the wild, uncontrolled in the end. I'm not saying one's better. These are different processes, different products, different categories. But I think that we need to understand the pros and cons of each one. I really don't think that you can get a consistent flavor and character. The other thing that's different in the Scotch whiskey industry is of course, you're fermenting a wash versus a mash. And so much of your conversion is really done up front. And so it's a little bit easier game for fermentation in a wash. I mean, fermentation kinetics are generally faster. The yeast seem to be a little bit happier in the wort or the wash than they are in the mash. Sometimes there's less potential for bacterial influence coming in there. And so maybe it's not as wild an event as I imagine it to be. But ultimately
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good.
But so just what Kevin's saying, he's referring to basically a clear wort versus a grain in or in situ fermentation. I just wanted to,
right, yeah,
for people who don't know that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and so like I said, I'm not trying to say one is better than the other. That's not it at all. I'm just saying that we kind of we deal with the process that we're given or design, and try to optimize it under understanding rather than just this is the way that we've always done it or stubborn tradition, for example. So in our particular our new facility, the design which I've led is going to be fairly innovative in several ways. We will use a brewery style system and fabrication, and it actually will double as a 30 barrel brew system and a 500,000 proof gallon distillery. There's a lot of design elements that I think will be very innovative built into that, but it will allow us to do all these things that I call the traditional processes, to utilize proprietary yeast strain, to do the lactic soured yeast mash, to also continue to utilize the diastase or the enzyme activity from malted barley as well. And I think that's another critical thing that is shifting in our industry. Is there are too many distilleries that are relying on commercial enzymes, the glucoamylase conversion versus the beta amylase, fermentation of glucose versus maltose, and it leads to a very different flavored distillate. And I would argue that you're not getting as rich a flavor of distillate. But that point kind of allows me to kind of come back to your question, Liz, about this yield versus I guess character, really. What I found is that if you optimize all aspects of fermentation, you'll work towards that highest yield. And what you're eliminating is the variable activity and influence of bacterial contamination along the way. So you are working towards a purer distillate and a more consistent distillate. That's not to say that some of these crazy, wild, contaminated fermentations don't do some, end in some sort of magic in the barrel, right? Through the oxidative processes, working on some of those organic acids if they make it into the distillate. So that's an aside from that. But what I will kind of carry on is if you don't optimize yield in fermentation, you get to a point where, if the difference between a 4.8 yield and a 5.5 yield is about, 15 to 20% of the residual sugars. And now you imagine those residual sugars rolling through the heat of distillation, exposed to that heat, resulting in charring and scorching of those compounds. And I fully believe that the inconsistency of many brands is a direct result of that damage to those residual carbohydrates through distillation, especially if you're in a pot still and that mash is boiling for 3 to 8 hours, for example. It could lead to some horrible off flavors. So
Which,
remember talking to Dr. Don up at in Windsor, and
Mr. Livermore,
yeah, remarked on how clean and pleasant his dry house smelled, and he said, that's how I know there's nothing wrong.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. If it doesn't smell good, there's something. Well, actually, what he said was, if it smells bad, somebody's getting fired, is what he said. So
yeah. But the larger distillers, have the resources, will actually look at residual starch in their DDGs or the distiller's byproducts and can monitor that as well. But good yield metrics. I've done a lot of work. Pardon me?
I was just saying HPLC work and fermentation and
Yeah, for sure. I think that good yield metrics. So one of the things that I'm finding as I go out and help some of the smaller distilleries in the area is that there are a lot of distilleries that don't have the basic metrics in place. They have no ability to assess yield. They look at alcohol levels in a fermenter, and they confuse alcohol levels in a fermenter with yield, and it has, obviously it correlates, right? Yeah, you need to do a volumetric on it and see how that's according to your grain bill, etc. So there's some simple measures. You don't need an HPLC, but it sure would be nice to have one. So.
And you're still consulting as well, or maybe not so much? I get it.
Informal consulting. No, I think that, I'm talking to my team here. I'm welcome to do that. It's just right now I just don't have the time. I think that every time I go out into the industry and work with people and you make new friends and establish yourselves as technical leaders in the industry, which I really believe we are. There are very few small distilleries, startup distilleries that have the level of experience that we do. And I'm not just talking about myself. Jeff Arnett with 20 years, Chris Tatum, who helped start Old Forge Distillery, Heath Clark of the H. Clark Distillery, which was folded into our group. These are all leaders in the Tennessee Whiskey Guild. I know you visited with Rob Penson last session. He's a great dude, a great friend, a great resource to our industry. And that group together were really influential in making what we're doing here in Townsend possible today. It would have been illegal a few years ago. So.
You did a couple of shout outs, but I will. We loved having Rob on, and I got to spend some good time with Rob down in New Orleans. And we actually co-hosted a little event, and I always learned something from him. And I know everyone you mentioned are huge assets for industry. So yeah,
and it was like one of those '80s super groups. It was just like all
right.
people come together.
Yeah. Kind of mentioning Chris Tatum, one of the things that because I've been in the more traditional side of the spirits industry, the whiskey industry, it's been interesting for me to come out to Eastern Tennessee and really recognize what a force the Eastern Tennessee moonshine industry has become. When you think about it, with one of the distilleries being the most visited distillery in the world, and it's largely based on tourist traffic through Chattanooga and so on. So we've actually started our line of it's specialty distilled spirits. We don't call it a moonshine, but I kind of like Jeff Arnett's term. He uses sophisticated shine. So we keep it out of the mason jar. We put it in a fancy bottle, and we're trying to wrap the kind of cocktail experience around in a kind of an effort to teach our guests how to utilize these cocktails in different, or these spirits in different cocktails. I particularly like the chocolate truffle. It goes very well in a Coke slushy. I do other fermentation. I have a kombucha based slushy from my homemade kombucha. And if you add our fruited spirits to those, it's absolutely delicious, especially the apple. It tastes like kind of a deep, rich alcoholic applesauce. I just love it. So I don't usually play on that side of the R&D, but it's good fun.
Well, it sounds like you've got a cocktail book in the making. First off,
while I'm doing show and tell, I have to highlight our Ghost Rail Gin. Ooh. So this actually was focused and produced in the old H. Clark Distillery in Thompson Station, just south of Nashville. And this gin under the H. Clark brand actually won Fred Minnick's Ascot Award for Best Gin in America.
Wow.
And we rebranded under Ghost Rail, and so nice packaging as well. I hope you believe. So that's the show and tell.
So are you widely distributed, or what's your?
We're distributed in Tennessee and Georgia, and we're available through the online CO box in 17 states as well.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
Awesome, perfect. I had like a burning question, but then I got trapped into
Sorry.
the conversation. But meanwhile, while I try to remember what my burning question was,
I mean, I've got a burning question. When can we get you back? Why? Because we didn't get anywhere near this stuff. I desperately wanted to talk to you about sweet mash, but we have no time for that.
Yeah.
So sweet. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that sweet mash is a funny thing because there are some people that tout sweet mash, but what you'll find is that sweet mash is more sour in the end than sour mash because of that buffering effect that happens. So you get more of the wild uncontrolled. I mean, there's a reason that Dr. Crow kind of helped engineer that. There's lots of history and interesting discussion on how backset was actually applied directly into the fermenter over time, and different iterations of that, from the backset slicker to the and all these other terms that you may or may not have heard of in the history of sour mash processes.
So I remember my question. I realize we only have 2 minutes left, so I'll be pretty brief here. But I wanted to just talk about, and you sparked my interest about how backset became versus like a cool ship method or a direct inoculation. But there is a water savings, right? So
huge,
sustainability.
Really?
That's a huge piece of. I mean, of course, we're looking at it how we can be more sustainable, and what you mentioned with yield, and I think a lot of people don't realize is, I think that's sustainable is because you're utilizing your resources more efficiently.
Yeah, there's lots of reasons to use backset too. That especially like if you think about what's recycled there, it's not just heat and water, but you have the dead yeast cells. I mean, yeast are little cannibals. They love to eat their dead brethren. It's the best nutrient for them, and so a lot of that comes around. Yeah, and we have in the new distillery design, actually, that's one of the innovations. Is I believe that I'll be able to use up to 60% backset with a well clarified product instead, because you get some viscosity challenges with that too. So have me back and I'll tell you all those details.
Okay. And just for reference, so 60% is quite a large for people who don't know. Usually it's about 20 to 25%. So
correct. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, even I knew that. I was like, holy crap.
Yeah. Well, fuel ethanol plants could use the whole stillage, and they would get up to 55% backset. But man, they were choking on viscosity. It was a very difficult process. Yeah.
Depending on, but most fuel is corn versus what we do.
Yeah. So you get less viscosity from the corn, but having that higher viscosity. And plus, they always use centrifuges to generate their backset, which is a little bit more efficient than stillage screens.
We normally do. Yeah.
Wow.
I am leaning in right now, and there's like a whole other
we're completely out of time.
segment that's going to happen. But unfortunately, we are up at end of time. I just wanted to check in, Lou. Did you have anything else?
No, I mean, everything else is really, I'd like to do another show right now, but no.
Lou, there's probably another book suggestion for you. If you look at the history of industrial processes and how those changes have influenced the technologies that we use, and then therefore the flavor and character of our whiskeys. I mean, think about it. In the old days, they didn't have the industrial capabilities that we have now. So in Germany, they would take a big rock, on a hoist and take it from the fire and drop it into the kettle. Think of how that created melanoids, noidins, and how that caramels. Right.
I actually got a friend who wants to do that book. So maybe we should.
So regroup. Sounds like
right.
Okay. Unfortunately,
Kevin, we gotta go.
We gotta go. But Kevin,
thank you so much.
Sorry about the connections challenges.
It happens more often than not, unfortunately.
in closing, we've got a couple comments. It sounds like Phil said, Kevin, when did you start dyeing your beard gray? Lou is doing it too. Is that a new fashion trend?
Yeah.
Yeah, mine pretty much went white in 2020.
Right?
Yeah.
Is glitter beard a thing still?
That would be cool. Yeah. Phil is a friend from the fuel ethanol side for many years of mine. So yeah. Thanks, Phil. Thanks for noticing my aging.
We got a last minute. We just got a question from Chris Clausen, and then we'll end it on this. Are small, medium craft distillers using any form of clarification on backset? And I think it depends, but Kevin,
there are so few of them that are using backset, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a couple examples that I can think of where they have very small, fairly kind of sanitary stillage screens, and I don't know what levels of backset they can utilize, but there are some that are doing that.
It's and my quick follow up with that, I think it's also a production planning and again ability to store, so a footprint issue to store stillage. However, I will say, and I'll end on this before I get down another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But both Fermentis and Lallemand have products out in the market, Lactobacillus plantarum, active dried, for the purpose of small.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's amazing how those companies, I mean, Lallemand with their sour VCA, for example, they're able to go to the industry almost as if they're recreating the sour mash process, as if they've created it and bringing it brand new to the industry, and it's doing good things and helping the process. So kudos to them for that as well. But yeah, it's very difficult to do these processes in small distilleries. Maintaining backset can be is more of a problem if you don't do it right, actually. So,
and
so
also,
with that, I'll say cheers. Let's see, here I am. Company
I was
Distillery.
just going to say also, there's a lot of more innovation happening on a smaller scale. So
Absolutely.
Versus
Right.
like a Jack or Bullet, for example.
Absolutely. And then on the, the potential of byproducts as human food, if you think about the protein shortages and the fact that the proteins that are in our mash are potentially human food grade plant-based proteins, we need to push that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Like literally, this is a whole other show. So, Kevin, again, I just wanted to thank you and really appreciate you being patient with our scheduling.
No problem at all.
Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for coming back.
We will have our
We're gonna have someone.
We're gonna have someone September 13th. So come back and join us then, and it's gonna be fantastic. I'm sure.
I gotta tell you, listening to Kevin just has my mind bubbling with the guests I want to get on now to talk about other stuff. I'm just, yeah.
You're gonna go another 100, aren't you?
Yeah. No.
I don't know. Not sure about that, but we for sure will live out our 100. And Kevin, thank you for being a part of our journey.
Thank you so much. I appreciate both of you.
That's great.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys. We'll
Thanks,
see you
everyone.
in 2 weeks.
Cheers, guys.